Welcome to Data Hurdles, a weekly podcast where we explore the impacts data and technology have on our day-to-day lives. My name is Michael Burke.
And I'm Chris Detzel. Welcome to another Data Hurdles. I'm Chris Detzel, and
I'm Michael Burke. How you doing, Chris?
pretty good, Michael. And we're trying this new way of doing audio and video with Riverside, so I'm pretty excited about it. How about you?
Yeah, I hope my voice just sounds incredible and like articulate. It's going to make me say better things, right?
Well, I don't know about that, but so I was doing a lot of thinking around kind of our next topic area, and it's funny because when you deal with the world of data, some of the biggest things that are going on right now is AI and ML, and how companies like product companies are embedding and thinking about AI and ML and how they're going to adopt it and all of these things, and there's been a little bit of I don't know if it's fear, maybe it's always fear at first, but and maybe it's for good reason, maybe it's not. But one topic that seems to keep popping up, and I'll give a little thing in a little while, but is generative AI. You're probably better at saying that, but you know, so I want to just try to kind of think about, hey, what is, and have you kind of answer some of these, but what is generative, shit, I can't even say it, AI, and what are some of the risks? What are people thinking? Like if you're a banking company or if you're a, insurance company or things like that, what's the benefits? But what are the risks? Why are people so scared and things like that? So I just kind of thought I would just start talking to you as the expert on, what is it? First of all, and then let's go deeper into this.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, for those that don't know what generative AI is, if you have used a chat GPT or any of these other big, large language models, it's a really good use case or kind of example of generative AI. Really what it is a branch of artificial intelligence that focuses on creating models and creating content from that, generating new original content. So when you think of like a traditional model, you may have like used linear regression to like forecast something in an Excel. That's taking existing information and trying to do something with it, right? Um, but with generative AI, the primary goal is to generate new content that's realistic and coherent and similar to the training data, right? So that's why when you ask ChatGPT a question, wow, um, you get these realistic answers that are driven off of real
Yeah.
data, is because it's mimicking something that it read or interpreted in the real world.
Mm. Okay. Well, you kind of explained how it worked, but let's go deeper into about how that really works.
Yeah, so there are, when you think about how does AI work, and like, we're probably going to have a couple data scientists on the call, so we'll touch over this quickly, but like, it's deep learning techniques, right? So if you think of generative adversarial networks, GANs, you may have heard this term before, or VAEs, or recurrent neural networks, these are all types of models that could be used to do generative AI work. And really all that they're doing is they're learning patterns and structures of existing content to try to generate new content. So, obviously that's why when you train a model like this, you need these huge amounts of information if you want to create high quality outputs like what ChatGPT has. Um, and this data, when you're trying to train this, goes through a lot of processes to kind of cleanse and unify and standardize it into ways that it can be used for a generative AI model. And a really good example of this is if you think about an image, right? Think of a 256 by 256 pixel image as an example.
Yeah.
Well, every pixel has a color value, right? Which let's say is from 0 to 255. Really, it's three numbers like that, but that is a data point that a generative AI model could consume. So to transform a picture into a bunch of values of color would be one way that you could do generative AI on images, right? Another
Yeah.
example of text is you're taking words and combinations and pairs of words and generating tokens, right, is what we call it. And a sequence of tokens might make up a phrase or a sentence that has meaning in some specific pattern that the model is supposed to recognize and identify. Um, I hope that was clear.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned at the very beginning like three different type of generative, generative AIs. I can't say the word today. But that's pretty confusing what you said. So maybe, I don't know, break it down on, what does it mean for real life? You know what I mean? Like you said some big words
Sure.
there.
Yeah. So these are just types of models that are identifying patterns in data, ultimately. Like
Okay.
any machine learning model, the biggest difference is that instead of predicting something like your traditional models would do, or classifying something like most of your
Hmm.
traditional models would do, these types of models, these generative models, are actually creating content, right?
Okay. Got it. So what's the difference between generative AI and other types of AI? What's kind of the, breakdown there?
Yeah, so that's kind of exactly what we were just talking about. That when you look at
Fair
a
enough.
generative AI model, it's creating new content, things that it's never
Yeah.
seen before, versus a classification model is trying to put data into specific bins, or a prediction model is trying to say, your stock price is $10 now, we think it's going to be 15 in a year, right? Those are the types of models that are classic, kind of more traditional models that you see more frequently in your day to day.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was looking for. So I appreciate that. What are some examples of applications of generative AI? I think you mentioned some of the, like one of the things was images, but is there any others that you can think of?
Oh, there's so many, right? So when we talk about generative AI, everybody's thinking about ChatGPT, which is just like
Yeah.
text, creating images. DALL-E, if you've seen it, right? You type in a keyword and it creates an image that can be amazing, representing something in the real world or based on those keywords. But there are so many other use cases for generative AI. You think about 3D models, right, is a really good example of a place where you're going to start to see a lot more generative AI movies. You're going to see more generative AI in the
Hmm.
future. We're already seeing it being used with music, right? People are creating music with generative AI. In fact, I have a friend of mine who has been working on this project for a while of trying to create music that calms you down. And he's
Hmm.
using generative AI and a couple other strategies to do that, right? To lower his heart rate. Um,
How
Producing
does that work?
code is
Like, does
another.
it take, well, I like the code thing, but when you go to the music, which is a little bit more interesting, is does it look at like past types of music and then just start looking at what might be? I mean, how does that work?
It's
Because it doesn't
generating
look at,
music. Yeah. It's generating music based off of music that it's heard, right? And then
uh-huh.
the big thing is a feedback loop of, well, how do you measure the heartbeat, right? So measuring the heartbeat or other signals that would create, angst or indicate that somebody is calm is using as a feedback loop. So when he listens to music, it's actually looking at that data and saying, okay, I'm learning what type of music makes you more calm, right?
Seems like, some of the musicians might get pissed that they're taking that these AI models are taking their music and combining it with other music and then just coming up with its own. That's I don't know. I mean, it's the same thing as like, you know, blogging and writing, right? It's doing the same thing that it's doing music and probably images and I don't know. Am I wrong?
I have mixed feelings about this. In some ways, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. If you're a content creator, we're a content creator. If somebody was creating a podcast that was regurgitating the information that we were talking about, you know, would I be pissed? Maybe, but like at the same time, we're all kind of learning from one another over time, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if you think about your own learning process, you read information and you consume it through books or articles, and then you consolidate that information into a new thought or story, right? And so
Yeah.
I still think that that is being done and has to be done. And I don't think that you're going to get like groundbreaking things through generative AI that are going to feel like complete copies of things. That's the really interesting piece about it, right? So it's a gray area, right? And there's a lot of kind of ambiguity on the pros and cons of both of that, right? I think the
So I
thing
want to
that's a
go.
little bit
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think the thing
Sorry.
that's a little bit scary is that will this, as these models get smarter and can actually
Mm.
generate things further and further ahead of what a human can generate, are we going to lose that talent inherently to create stuff on our own? That's the piece that scares me more than anything else. And this is getting a little sci-fi, but like as we become more and more reliant on this, will we not be able to think about how to create better and more, complex content on our own because we're dependent on a machine to help us with that ideation?
Do we need to though? I don't
That's a
know.
whole
Like,
nother question. Do we need to, right?
um, you mentioned code, which that intrigues me a lot, and the reason is because I've worked with I've worked with software for a long time, and I've worked with different teams like developers and things like that. And a lot of times, what happens with these teams is they'll start creating code on and developing different pieces of software, but then they leave, and all that is missed. And then you have somebody else that comes up that may be a junior developer that doesn't know exactly what they're doing, and they might screw up some of that code, and then they have to go back and clean it up, and so code can get messy and nasty, and you know I kind of see this as a huge opportunity for AI to kind of take it, or for us to take advantage of from that standpoint. I mean, what do you think? Is that somewhat logical from my point of view? Because man, that would solve a lot of problems, it seems.
I
When you
think
get
that
clean code all the time. So
it definitely would be a huge aid to a new developer. And it's not even a junior developer. Any developer who's trying to learn about a code base quickly, this could be an
yeah,
advantage, right? If it was tuned in position properly. I think also when you think about mapping code and kind of reusability of code, there's a huge opportunity there as well of, can a AI model help synthesize code and find similarities in places that it can be shrunk down and the code base could be reduced. Um,
mm,
you know, we tend to believe that we are always able to code in perfect harmony and create reusable libraries, but the fact is that over a certain number of people, these models start to silo anyways, right? And developers
yeah.
start developing libraries that are not reusing code at an optimized pattern, right? Um, so I think that yeah, there is a lot of opportunity there for new developers and even for more experienced developers, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I used to develop where I'd have to visit Stack Overflow because I had a question and I'd
Mm.
spend 30 minutes researching something and learning something new. And yeah, that was important. But imagine if I could just say that prompt to ChatGPT, they provide an answer and I've learned it that way, right? More immediately. I think that's where, when you think about
Copy and
the
paste,
ability
baby.
to,
Copy and paste.
well, it's not even copy and paste. It's about the ability to search and understand contents, right? The context
Yeah,
of what you're trying to accomplish. When you're searching on a search engine like Google, it's really
yeah,
difficult to refine the right keywords to
that's right.
understand the examples that you're looking for. Whereas when a machine already understands all the code that you're working with, when you ask it a question, it has all that context to be able to provide you a much more tailored answer to your needs. That's where I think the learning really cuts down. That time to learn is going to accelerate rapidly.
Yeah, I agree. It's intriguing to me. So, how does generative AI learn and improve over time? How does that work?
Right. So, there's a couple ways. One is, the model complexity. As the model learns more, collects more information, is trained on a larger data set, right? You're going to see that the model complexity grows. And that means that the model will improve over time. And you think about like where generative AI models started, and especially like the large language models, they were at like, 4 billion, then 8 billion, now 16 is like way in the past. I think we're at 64. I don't even know where it is right now. They're getting huge, right? And they're
Yeah,
costing more and more money to run. But because of that, they're becoming more and more accurate and more generalized over time. And this is really driven by the amount of data that's been made available for these models to be trained on. But I also think that when you think about generative AI and how can it improve over time, right now we're just we're blasting like these as general as possible models that we're creating, right? Trained on the internet.
Mhm.
Where you're going to see a lot of advancements is in these specific models tuned and defined for specific use cases. You already see Google has MedPom 2 out, right? I think I said that right. Um,
Hmm.
which is a large language model trained on healthcare data, right? Not trained on the internet. It has a specific use case. And you're going to see more of these models that are trained in specific industries on specific data that are going to provide better outcomes for those use cases because the scope of the
It's not
model is
so
limited,
generic. Yeah.
right? But the breadth of the model is much deeper. And I think that's where when you talk about the future of generative AI, you're going to see that across every industry. You're going to see it across every industry for text, for video, for music. What if you had uh, a musical AI that was trained just on classical music? Could it produce a better song than a generic machine? Probably, right? Um, so I think this is where you'll start to see some really interesting kind of focus and also isolation of different tasks being done at exceedingly um, more accurate or more desirable outcomes.
So this brings up a question that I have around ethical or whatever, but as I kind of look at healthcare, banking, pharmaceuticals, et cetera, those with all this data about people, you know what I mean? And people's information, not just information, but, you know, like healthcare information, like what has been wrong with them and all these other things. Are you saying that these healthcare companies, like, I mean, Google probably has a lot of this information, just feeds that information or feeds these models that information? Maybe it doesn't say Chris Detzel, but it just says, minus this person's name, here's all the information about these people. That's real. You know what I mean? Is that ethical? Is that right? I don't know.
So one thing that I always want to pull back on is I would not think of the models as ethical or unethical. I would think of the way that we prepare data to be the most
Um,
important piece in that, right?
yeah.
If you are a hospital and you are using information from, hundreds of thousands of patients anonymously to train a model on brain tumors, right? And it's going to better society and be better at detecting brain tumors than anything in the past, right? Is that a good thing? Is data being used in the right ways? What and really when you're developing any kind of data concept or structure, you really have to think about, what is the absolute worst case scenario and best case scenario that we could create by deploying this model today, right? So you think of something like a brain tumor model, it's, what if obviously the worst is that it's just predicting things wrong and causing bodily harm to a lot of people. But when you think about like from a data perspective, what happens if that model was reverse engineered and somebody was able to extract some of that information, that personal information? What would we be exposing? And what is the risk associated with those potential exposures? That's the kind of questions that I'd ask myself, right? And what steps did we take as an organization to protect that information, right? Did we anonymize it in some way? Was there a way to anonymize it? Obviously, removing things like names and social security numbers tied to that information is important. But what about city and state, right? What if you're trying to look at, or gender, right? Are these things that would play an impact in this detection model? Probably not for brains, but you never know, right? You never know what features are going to provide relevant signal um, to create an outcome. And I think that's
Yeah, but not
where,
not for brain, not for brain, dude, but for over time as this model continues to learn and you're feeding it, it I would think that, hey, it could use that information for something else later, right? Not, right now, okay, we're just looking at brain tumors, right? But later on, it could be looking for something like how many people within Dallas, Texas, at this zip code are having this thing, and are they male, are they female, or well, let's dial in more in their location. What's their address? You know what I mean? So I think
right,
over time, you still got to be careful about that because it's just once it's in there, like it's done.
you have to be
So,
incredibly careful and you have to be forward thinking with understanding what are the ramifications on what I'm doing today and how will they impact things in the future. 100% agree with that. And, on top of that, data in general, I think the best and most forthcoming way that you can do that is be fully transparent with people on how you're
Hmm.
using this information up front, right? It's one thing to make a mistake. Many companies have made mistakes with information in the past, and they will continue to into the future. It's another thing when you aren't transparent about how and why you're using information when you collect it. And to me, as a consumer, I think that being made aware of more of that is important, right?
Yeah, and, it's tricky because think about how you're aware of certain things. It's like, oh well, accept these terms and conditions, boom, go. You know what I mean? Nobody reads the terms and conditions, they just click accept. So my thinking is that really making you aware of it? I mean, you could, I mean, you should read it, but who reads this 500-page document of terms and conditions? You know what I mean? And I'm
Yeah. Well,
afraid that that's all that's going to be.
I think that, and that's a serious problem, right? But you also have to think about all of these other ways that we're starting to protect people better, like right to forget is a great one. I've realized that I disagree with the way that you're using my data. I want you to remove it from your systems, please. And you can request that. Um, these abilities to track data better, metadata analysis, this whole idea of being able to understand how data is being used within a company, right?
Hmm.
These types of tools are emerging because transparency is being driven through regulation. And even though it's a lagging function right now, people are asking those questions. They are becoming more concerned about how their information is being used, and they're starting to see the ramifications of not having due diligence when they share information, right? From data breaches to, being overly targeted with ads to bias. There's a lot of things happening right now, and people aren't as, they are more aware than ever compared to 5 or 10 years ago when nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. What do you think? All right, so the other day I was on the phone with the CIO of this big bank, and one of the things that this person said was, you know, if you use generative AI, then, um, we're not going to stay with you. You know what I mean? That we're not going to use any company that does that. And what do you think that comes from? And why would you think that, a CIO of a bank would say that?
I mean, look, people are concerned that generative AI is sparking a whole nother field of an opportunity for people to misuse data, right? If you send
Yeah.
your data to ChatGPT, even if they have the proper policies and regulatory agreements and everything else, you're sending data into another server where it's being processed. For many companies, they don't want that, right? I think that the common misconceptions is that information has to go somewhere else to be processed in one of these tools. And the fact is, already there's a lot of technologies where you can host these models locally. You could run them in isolated environments. You could run them on customer environments. And so, what a lot of executives are doing is saying, hold on, pump the brakes. Like, I need to fully understand this until I'm ready to move forward. Right. And my
Yeah.
perception of it today is that I'm being exposed to a lot of risk. And if you expose me to
Yeah.
that risk, I don't want to be a part of it. And
I
that's
think
that's
that's
honestly, to me, that's what a CDO and a CTO should be doing, right? They're protecting their customers and they're protecting their data, and that's an authentic way to act, in a lot of ways.
no, I completely agree. I mean, I just thought out. What do you think? Like, if you were to, and you can give a study, not necessarily a case study, but if you think about like, some really positive things that generative AI could help a business. One is, what business would it be, and how can it help a business? That business, whether it's banking or industry or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, every industry is going to benefit from generative AI. And I know that there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of wonky kind of things being talked about on the internet, but every business will benefit from this in one way or another. whether it's reducing manual labor and effort to do something. You think about how many times we look things up or we use these technologies to expedite something in our process, to creating content, to developing code faster, to fully automated processes, right? If generative AI was properly trained with the right prompts, could it replace, I don't know, a customer success person? Probably not, right? You're always going to need people, but could it replace the first line of questioning when you're doing
Support
customer success work? Support,
or support.
right?
You know what I mean?
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about like baseline analysis of complex scenarios? Probably, right? There's a lot of areas where I think you're going to see things start to emerge. But again, don't think about generative AI as what it is today with these very generic models. Think forward thinking
Yeah.
about specific industry models. How would those drive change if they were really good at doing what they are doing today, generally for a specific industry?
So as I kind of, and I've talked about this, is if you build a localized model, let's say a product company, I think every product company is going to do this over time, is in a sense, you always people always need help, especially with, well, it could be any product, but let's just say an enterprise level product, right? So anybody that spends a lot of money on a product that's, it's hard to use sometimes, or there's lots of code that goes into it, or a lot of integrations or whatever. What I think that um, is that we will start training some localized models specifically on the product and how it and everything that and how it works, the ins and outs and everything, right? And so whether it's the documentation today, whether it's an online community, or whether it's some kind of videos that go deep you know uh, into the product, which there's already generative. You could hook up an API, or I don't know if it's API, but you could already hook that up to YouTube, right? And it spits you out a right nice little uh, uh, summary. But what I believe is that you'll be able to go into the product, if it's a SaaS product, for example, and you'll be using it and you're like, I don't know how to do this thing. And instead of going to support, you'll just say, how do you do this with this product? And it's going to say, do this, here's the line of code, boom, and they're going to do it and it's going to work. You know what I mean? Like, those are the things that I see from every product company should do this. Like I'm, would be surprised if no one's thinking about that. And everybody should be thinking about that from a product SaaS company, I think, you know?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that, again, learning everything going to be very difficult, right? Because you have to
Yeah,
structure data for these machines to learn, and most companies won't have that data available. Learning documentation, learning support questions, learning how to better answer
yeah,
communities, 100%. I think those are areas where the data is in a structure that's ready for one of these models to learn, right? So
absolutely.
there is a lot of opportunity, and I think that people are going to get much more creative about designing the proper flywheels to make these AIs learn more. But that's AI in general. That's not even generative AI. We are evolving
Mhm.
in how we think about structuring data from day one. And companies that aren't doing that are putting themselves at a severe disadvantage across the industry.
Completely agree, man. I mean, it's just crazy how we're hearing these companies. I mean, it's just the crazy buzz. And we'll kind of end with this, but I want to kind of get your take on, is this hype like real, and it's just all this stuff's gonna really just take off in the next 5? I feel like it will, but I don't know. Or do we need to kind of slow down and say, look, you know, yes, it's real, yes, it's these things, but or did Chat GPT and Google with Bard and stuff like that, did they just open the gates and people are just going crazy? What's going on? Let's talk about that for
Yeah,
a second.
it is real. It's coming. The hype will always be the hype, and there is a massive hype curve right now, and not everything that you hear will, materialize. But change is coming in the way that we do a lot of simple things in the world, and you will see that start to emerge more and more through models like generative AI. Now, to your point, we do need to slow down in a lot of areas too. And I don't think we have the capability to. So I think what
Mm,
needs to happen is regulatory systems and people who are in charge of facilitating compliance and governance need to speed up because this technology is here, it's moving fast, and I don't think it will slow down for anything at this point, right? It's already out there. So everyone else has to catch up, and those that are first movers that are going to jump on the bandwagon and start building with this will pull ahead for sure.
completely agree. Well, Michael, thanks so much for another Data Hurdles. I'm Chris Detzel, and
I'm Michael Burke. Thanks for tuning in.
all right, and don't forget to rate and review us. We need all the ratings and reviews that we can get. So take care.
Take care.